The airlock door opened before I was ready for it, and the cold hit me like a wall made of needles. Two guards pushed me forward. Neither of them looked at my face. That told me everything about what they thought of me. My name is Daniel Vance. 3 hours ago, I was a prisoner on a Confederacy transport ship. Now I am standing on a docking ramp, staring into a station that has not seen a living crew in 6 years. Behind me, one of the guards spoke in the flat, clicking language of the Austrian Council. You will not be rescued. You will not be remembered. This is mercy, human. Be grateful we did not simply space you. I did not answer. I had learned a long time ago that silence makes people uncomfortable, and discomfort makes them careless. The ramp sealed shut behind me with a hiss, and then the transport engines fired somewhere above the hull, and then there was nothing. No engines, no voices, no footsteps except my own. Just me, in a suit with 4 hours of air left, standing in a station called Ash Cradle. I did not sit down and grieve. I did not scream at the ceiling. I have seen men do that in worse places than this, and it never once fixed anything. Instead, I started walking. The corridor lights were dead, but my helmet had its own beam, and I used it to sweep the walls, cracked panels, torn wiring, a thin layer of frost on every surface, the kind that forms when heat has been gone for a very long time. I found a door marked with a symbol I recognized from old mining schematics, reactor access. My hands were shaking from the cold, but I forced them steady, and pried the panel open with a tool I had smuggled inside my boot heel, a tool the guards never thought to search for because who searches a condemned man for tools? Behind the panel, a single indicator light blinked, weak, orange, alive. The reactor was not dead. It was starving. I stood there for a long moment, looking at that one small light in a station full of darkness, and something in my chest settled into place. They had sent me here to run out of air quietly. Nobody had told the reactor that. I switched my suit radio off to save power, and I got to work. The first thing I needed was heat, because heat meant I would not die in my sleep from the cold alone. I traced the coolant lines back from the reactor core and found a heating loop that fed 3 small rooms near the old crew quarters. 2 of the 3 were sealed shut, warped from some old impact. The third opened with a groan and a puff of stale air. Inside, there was a cot, bolted to the floor, and a locker, and nothing else. I did not know yet that this room would become the only home I had left. I only knew it was small enough to heat, and that mattered more than comfort. By the time my air gauge dropped below 1 hour, I had rerouted enough power to get the heating loop humming. It was not much. It would keep the room a few degrees above freezing, which on a station like this counted as luxury. I pulled off my helmet and breathed the station air for the first time. It tasted like metal and dust and something faintly sweet, like coolant fumes. It did not kill me. That was the only test that mattered. I sat down on the cot, and for the first time since the transport had left orbit, I let myself feel the size of what had happened. I had been a soldier. Then I had been a weapon they were proud of. Then I had ended a war in a way they were not proud of, and so I became a problem. And problems on the edge of Confederacy space do not get trials. They get transports, and dead stations, and doors that seal shut behind them. I did not cry. I am not built that way. Or maybe I stopped being built that way a long time before this. Instead, I opened the locker beside the cot, mostly out of habit, mostly because idle hands find trouble, and I did not want trouble yet. Inside was a logbook, paper, not digital, the old kind miners used, when equipment failed too often to trust computers. The handwriting inside was human. Day 1, it said. Assigned to Ash Cradle for mineral survey. Rescue window in 11 months. Feels long, but we have supplies. 6 of us. Good crew. I turned the pages slowly. The entries grew shorter. The handwriting grew smaller, more careful, like the writer was trying to save ink, or maybe trying to save hope by rationing how much of it he spent on words. Day 210. Rescue ship never came. Coordinates filed wrong somewhere back home. We are still here. Marta thinks somebody will notice eventually. I stopped believing that around day 100. The last entry was 4 words long. Told them. Nobody listened. I closed the logbook and set it down on the cot beside me, and I did not open it again that night. But I did not forget it either. Some men would have taken that logbook as a warning, a sign that this place eats people slowly and quietly, and that fighting it is pointless. I took it as something else, a list of mistakes, a map of everything that had killed the last crew, laid out clearly enough that I would not have to make the same ones twice. They had waited for rescue. I was not going to wait for anything. The next morning, if you could call it morning, in a place with no sun, I began mapping the station properly. 6 decks, 4 of them fully depressurized, open to space through hull breaches nobody had ever patched. 2 decks salvageable, if I was careful, and if I was willing to spend weeks doing work that would have taken a full engineering crew days. I was willing. I found a maintenance drone in a storage bay, its legs snapped off, its processor intact. I found a cutting torch with half a charge left. I found 3 canisters of sealant foam, expired but usable, the kind that hardens in vacuum and holds a patch long enough to matter. None of it was enough on its own. All of it together was a beginning. I worked until my hands stopped shaking from cold and started shaking from exhaustion instead. And then I stopped, because a man who works past exhaustion makes mistakes, and mistakes in vacuum only happen once. I lay on the cot that night and stared at the ceiling, and thought about the guards who had pushed me through that airlock without looking at my face. They thought this place would be my grave. I decided, somewhere in that first cold night, that it was going to be something else instead. The next several days blurred into a single long task, broken only by sleep I did not fully trust myself to take. I patched the worst hull breach on Deck 2 using scrap plating and sealant foam, working in a suit that had maybe 30 minutes of air margin if anything went wrong. Nothing went wrong, not because I was lucky, but because I checked every seam twice and every valve 3 times. Carelessness is a luxury for people who expect someone else to fix their mistakes. I did not have that luxury anymore. Once the breach was closed, I bled a small amount of atmosphere from a reserve tank I found sealed in an emergency locker, and Deck 2 filled with air for the first time in 6 years. I stood in the corridor without my helmet and listened to the station breathe. It groaned, old metal settling under new pressure. It sounded like something waking up after a long, cold sleep, and I understood that feeling better than I wanted to admit. The reactor was still the real problem. It ran, but weakly, feeding off a fuel rod that was nearly spent, the kind of low output that could keep lights on in one corridor but nothing more ambitious than that. I spent 2 full days studying the reactor schematics I found etched into a maintenance tablet, the screen cracked but still readable if I angled my light correctly. I am not a nuclear engineer. I was a soldier, but soldiers learn to read manuals under pressure, because the manual is sometimes the only thing standing between you and a mistake you do not walk away from. On the 3rd day, I found what I needed. A secondary fuel cell, unused, stored in a cargo hold I had not fully explored yet. It had been left behind, maybe because it was heavy, maybe because whoever evacuated this station did so in a hurry and did not have time to be thorough. Their hurry was my gift. Installing it took me 11 hours. I will not pretend that number sounds impressive. It should have taken a certified engineer perhaps 2. But I did it without ever letting the core drop below its safety threshold, without ever letting radiation exposure creep past what my suit could handle. And when I finally sealed the access panel and stepped back, the indicator light on the reactor console shifted from a weak orange to a steady, confident green. Power hummed through the station in a way it had not in 6 years. I did not celebrate. I have learned that celebration too early is how good progress turns into a disaster you did not see coming. Instead, I moved room to room, testing every system the new power could reach. Lights. Half of them worked. I left the broken ones for later. Heating. Now covering 3 full decks instead of 1 small room. Water reclamation. Rusted, sluggish, but functional. Cycling moisture from the air into something drinkable if I filtered it twice. Food was the real problem. The station's old supplies had long since been stripped or spoiled, and I had brought nothing with me except the suit on my back. I found ration bars in an emergency kit, enough for maybe 3 weeks if I was careful with portions, and I forced myself to be careful, even when hunger made careful feel unbearable. I needed a longer answer than 3 weeks of ration bars, so I turned my attention to the hydroponics bay on Deck 3. It was in worse condition than anything else I had found. Every growing tray was dry and cracked. The irrigation system had corroded through in a dozen places. But the seed storage locker, sealed and airtight, had survived intact, and inside it, I found dormant seed packets for basic vegetables. The hardy kind mining crews grow, because they do not require much skill to keep alive. I am not a farmer either. I had never grown a single plant in my life before that station. But I had time, and I had determination, and determination is a strange kind of fuel that does not run out the way food does. I rebuilt the irrigation lines using scavenged pipe from the depressurized decks. I rigged growing lights from salvaged fixtures, wiring them into the new power grid with hands that had gotten steadier with every passing day of practice. I planted the first seeds not knowing if any of it would work, and then I waited, checking the trays every morning with something that felt almost like hope, though I would not have called it that out loud. 9 days later, the first green shoot pushed up through the soil. I stood there staring at it for longer than I care to admit. A small green thread, barely the width of a wire, reaching up toward a light I had built with my own hands, in a place they had sent me to die. I thought about the guards again, and the flat voice that had told me I would not be remembered. I decided remembering was overrated. Being alive was better. Word by word, room by room, the station stopped being a grave and started being something else. I did not have a word for what it was becoming yet. I only knew that every morning I woke up on that cot, my body ached less from cold and more from ordinary work, and that felt like a kind of victory nobody back home would ever know to count. I turned my attention next to defense, because a man who rebuilds a station and does nothing to protect it is only rebuilding a slightly nicer grave. The old mining drills, the ones used to bore through asteroid rock during the station's original operation, were heavy, powerful, and completely unused for their intended purpose. But they were also, with enough modification, capable of punching through hull plating at close range. I spent nearly 2 weeks converting 3 of them into fixed defensive turrets, mounting them at key corridor junctions and along the outer hull near the docking ring. I rewired their targeting systems using parts scavenged from the same maintenance drone whose processor I had salvaged earlier, teaching it, piece by piece, to recognize the difference between station personnel and anything else. There was only one piece of station personnel for it to recognize: me. Everything else, it was told, was a threat. I tested the system carefully, using scrap metal launched from a compressed air line to simulate an incoming target. The first turret missed entirely. The second clipped the target and sent it spinning. The third hit dead center and reduced the scrap to a spray of fragments against the corridor wall. I adjusted the aim calibration and ran the test again and again. Each time, the accuracy improved, the same way my hands had improved at wiring circuits, the same way my knowledge of the station's systems had grown from nothing into something close to mastery. By the time I stopped counting the days since the airlock had sealed behind me, I had lost track of the exact number, somewhere past 60, though it did not matter anymore in the way it once had. What mattered was this: 3 decks pressurized and heated, a reactor running clean and steady, a hydroponics bay producing enough food to stretch far past what any ration bar could offer, 3 defensive turrets ready along the most likely approach vectors, and a communications relay, patched together from salvaged dish components that let me listen, quietly, to the wider galaxy that had thrown me away. I never transmitted anything, I only listened. I learned the patrol schedules of nearby Confederacy scout ships. I learned which trade routes ran close enough to this dead system that a curious captain might someday glance this way and wonder why an abandoned station was putting out heat and light again. I knew that day would come eventually. I made sure that when it did, Ash Cradle would not look like an easy grave to walk into. The scout ship appeared on my relay feed on what I had started calling Day 104, though the number had stopped meaning much beyond marking time. Its transponder identified it as belonging to the Austrian Council, the same government that had sentenced me here, a patrol vessel, small, fast, built for reconnaissance rather than combat. It was moving through a routine sweep pattern, the kind of lazy, half-attentive patrol crews run through systems long since written off as empty. I watched its course update every few minutes, my chest tight in a way that had nothing to do with the station's air quality. For a long while, it looked like the ship would pass through the outer edge of the system and continue on, the way it probably had 100 times before whenever nobody was here to notice. Then it slowed. I do not know exactly what caught its attention, maybe a stray energy reading from my reactor, leaking further than I had accounted for. Maybe a scanner sweep that happened to catch the warm glow of my hydroponics bay against the cold backdrop of a system everyone assumed was empty. Whatever it was, the ship altered course, and its new heading pointed directly at Ash Cradle. I did not panic. I want to be honest about that, because panic is a word people use for a feeling I have simply never allowed myself to have in moments like this. What I felt instead was something colder and more useful, a narrowing of focus, a checklist running through my mind, item by item, the same discipline that had kept me alive through worse things than a single scout ship. I moved through the station quickly, confirming every system was ready. Turrets armed and calibrated, airlock seals reinforced, power rerouted to prioritize defense systems over the growing lights, which could survive a few dark hours without lasting harm. Then I did the only thing left to do. I waited. The scout ship's pilot, according to the fragments of chatter I picked up on the relay, was named Vray, a junior officer assigned to routine sweeps, precisely because command considered this sector too dull to warrant anyone more experienced. Vray's voice, translated through my patched-together comm system, sounded bored right up until the moment it did not. Command, this is Scout Designation 7, requesting confirmation. Ash Cradle Station reads active. Repeat, active. Power signature and atmospheric readings inconsistent with abandoned status. There was a pause, long enough that I imagined someone on the other end checking records, finding my name attached to this station, and deciding the whole thing had to be some kind of sensor malfunction. Confirmed on record as decommissioned 6 years ago, the response finally came. Investigate and report. Do not engage. I listened to that exchange with a strange, tight feeling in my chest that I eventually recognized as something close to satisfaction. They still did not believe it, even with their own sensors telling them otherwise. The idea that I had survived, let alone rebuilt anything, sat outside what they were willing to accept. Good. Let them keep underestimating that. The scout ship closed the remaining distance over the following hour, and I used every minute of it to run one final check of every system I had built. I am not a man who believes in luck. I believe in preparation, and preparation was the only thing standing between me and whatever came next. When the ship finally settled into a docking approach, I opened a channel, the first transmission I had sent since arriving at this station. My voice came out steadier than I expected. This station is occupied. Approach the docking ring and you will be scanned. Do not attempt forced entry. There was a long silence on the other end. I imagined Vray staring at their console, trying to reconcile a dead man's voice with the records that said this place should be empty. Finally, a response came, careful, formal, the kind of voice trained to sound calm even when it was not. This is Scout Designation 7. We read you as station personnel designated Daniel Vance. Exile status confirmed. State your intentions. My intentions, I said, are to keep breathing. Yours are the ones I am curious about. Another silence. Then the ship's docking clamps engaged against my outer ring, and I felt the station shudder slightly under the new weight. They were coming aboard. I moved to the central junction near the docking bay, the point where all 3 of my defensive turrets had clean lines of sight, and I waited there, arms loose at my sides, looking every bit like a man with nothing to hide and everything under control. The airlock cycled. 3 figures stepped through, wearing Austrian Council uniforms, weapons drawn but lowered, the posture of people expecting to find a corpse or a lunatic, not entirely sure which would be worse. The one in front, tall, pale-skinned, with the kind of sharp, alert eyes that told me this was Vray, stopped a few meters into the corridor and looked around at the working lights, the clean air, the faint green glow spilling from the hydroponics bay down the hall. This is not possible, Vray said, mostly to themselves. I did not answer right away. I let the silence do the work. Let them take in everything their briefing had told them could not exist. You were left here to die, Vray finally said, turning to look at me directly. I know, I said. Nobody told the station that was the plan. One of the other officers moved a hand toward their weapon, a small, almost involuntary gesture, the kind people make when a situation stops matching anything they trained for. I did not move. I did not need to. The turret mounted above the junction rotated with a soft mechanical whir, its sensor light shifting from standby amber to active red, tracking the officer's hand with a patience that was somehow more unsettling than any shout of warning could have been. The officer froze. I want you to understand something, I said, keeping my voice level. I did not build this to threaten anyone who leaves peacefully. I built it because the last people who came through that airlock intended to leave me here to run out of air. I am not interested in repeating that experience from the other side. Vray studied me for a long moment, and something in their expression shifted from disbelief into something closer to genuine curiosity, the look of a person recalculating everything they thought they understood about a situation. You rebuilt all of this, Vray said slowly. Alone. Alone, I confirmed. In under 4 months. I did not have anyone to explain the schedule to, I said. It went faster than I expected. One of the other officers muttered something in their own language, low enough that my translator only caught fragments, something about impossible and something about report, and I let them talk, because every word they said out loud was a word they would have to repeat to whoever had sent them here. Vray raised a hand, silencing the muttering, and looked at me with an expression I could not fully read, somewhere between wariness and something that almost resembled respect, though I was not naive enough to trust that read completely. We were told to confirm the anomaly and report back, Vray said. Nothing about engagement. Then confirm it, I said. Tell them exactly what you saw. Vray's eyes moved once more across the corridor, taking in the lights, the hum of working systems, the faint green shimmer of growing plants down the hallway, and finally back to me, standing calm and unarmed, in the middle of a station that should have been a tomb. They will not believe it, Vray said quietly. Then bring proof, I said. I am not going anywhere. Vray's crew withdrew without further incident, retreating back through the airlock with the careful, unhurried steps of people who understood that any sudden movement might be the last one they made. I watched them go without lowering my guard, and only once the outer airlock cycled fully closed did the tension in my shoulders finally begin to ease. I did not expect that to be the end of it. I was right not to. 3 days later, my relay picked up a new transmission pattern, larger, more coordinated, the kind of communication traffic that meant someone higher up the chain had taken Vray's report seriously enough to act on it. I spent those 3 days preparing, not with panic, but with the same methodical focus that had gotten me this far. I reinforced the turret mounts with additional scavenged plating. I rerouted a secondary power line to give the defense grid a backup in case the primary reactor connection was somehow compromised. I moved every non-essential system offline during the hours I expected the highest activity, conserving power for what actually mattered. When the second ship arrived, it was larger than the Scout, a light patrol cruiser carrying what my sensors read as a full boarding complement, not the cautious 3 officers of before, but something closer to a dozen. This time, there was no polite exchange over an open channel first. This time, the ship attempted a direct breach at a secondary airlock on Deck 4, the one section of the station I had left deliberately weaker, because a trap only works if it looks like a mistake. Their breaching charge blew the outer seal exactly as I expected it would, and the moment atmosphere began venting into that section, the automated bulkhead I had rigged weeks earlier slammed shut behind the boarding party, sealing 12 armed officers into a narrow, unfamiliar corridor with exactly one way forward and no way back. I watched through a salvaged camera feed as confusion rippled through their formation. They had expected an easy breach into open station, not a corridor with a single locked door ahead of them and a sealed bulkhead behind. I opened a channel to that corridor alone. You are standing in a section I built specifically for people who choose the difficult way in, I said. The easy way was still open. You chose this instead. A voice, harsher than Vray's, cut back through the channel, full of the particular anger people feel when a plan has already started falling apart. Open this door, human, or we cut through it. Cutting through takes time, I said, and every minute you spend cutting is a minute my turret at the far end has line of sight down that corridor, once the inner door opens automatically in exactly 4 minutes, which it will, whether you are ready for it or not. The silence that followed was longer this time, heavier, the sound of a dozen people realizing at once that the trap they had walked into was not a mistake at all, but a very deliberate piece of architecture built by a man they had been told was either dead or harmless. I want to be clear about something, I continued, keeping my voice steady, almost conversational. I do not want to hurt anyone who is only following orders. I have been on that side of an order before, but I will not let anyone take this station from me twice, and I will use whatever it takes to make sure that does not happen. There was a long pause, filled with muffled voices arguing in a language my translator struggled to keep pace with, and then the harsh-voiced officer spoke again, quieter this time, some of the edge gone from it. What do you want? I want you to leave, I said. I will open the outer door. You will return to your ship. You will tell whoever sent you exactly what you found here, because lying about it will only mean they send more people who are even less prepared than you were. Another pause. Then, grudgingly, the voice answered, Agreed. I released the outer seal, and the boarding party retreated in tight, wary formation, weapons still raised but never fired, back through the breach and into their waiting ship. I watched the cruiser detach from my docking ring and pull away, engines burning hard, the unmistakable posture of a ship leaving somewhere it very much did not want to return to. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding, and for the first time since the airlock had sealed behind me all those months ago, I allowed myself something close to a smile. They had sent a killer to a place meant to erase him quietly. Instead, that place had become something they now had to explain to their superiors, a station that refused every assumption they had built their entire operation on. I did not know yet what would come next. I did not know if the next ship would try diplomacy or force, or something else entirely. What I did know was this. Every day I woke up on that station was a day further from the grave they had intended for me, and every system I had rebuilt, every seed that had grown, every turret that now stood ready along my corridors, was proof of something they had never accounted for. They had underestimated exactly how much a person can become when the alternative is disappearing quietly. I walked back through the station that evening, past the hydroponics bay glowing soft green under its lights, past the reactor humming steady and strong, past the cot in that first small room, where I had once shivered through a night wondering if I would survive until morning. I was still there, still breathing, still building. Somewhere out among the stars, a report was being filed about a dead station that was not dead at all, about a man they had thrown away who had refused, in every possible sense of the word, to disappear. Let them file their report. Let them send whoever they wanted next. Ash Cradle was mine now, built board by board and wire by wire, out of nothing but stubbornness and the simple refusal to stop, and nobody who came looking for a grave was going to find one here. They had banished a killer to a dead station. What they had actually done was give him a home and hand him more time than he needed to make it strong enough that nobody would ever be able to take it from him again.